So glad to see you, and thanks so much for just your participation. I'm just excited about what God is doing. If you are new, we're in a series called All Things New. It's based out of the last book of the Bible called Revelation. Before I begin, I want to just share a quick story. A friend of mine was, he got caught by the police. This is back in the 80s, got caught by the police because he ran a red light. He was a youth minister, and he had a van, and instead of having 15 people in a 15-seater van, I think he had like 160, and people were literally hanging, from the rafters, and he was late for an event. And, back in the 80s, you actually could pile that many people in with no seatbelts. Insurance didn't care, and then all of a sudden, someday, that switched. And when he got pulled over for kind of going through, it was more yellowish that he says, but it was kind of yellow going red, and it was more like a pink. And so he's going through this red light, and then he gets pulled over, and his brake light was out, and he's ticking. It's ticking the boxes of all these things. Eventually, he ends up in a court date because he can't afford to pay the fine. And so this was his plan. He tells us this, and we're praying for him. He goes, guys, I'm going to court. I know I'm guilty, but I'm going to throw myself on the mercy of the court. We're like, we don't even need to pray about that, because that's just dumb. That's just never going to happen. And he goes, I need you to pray for it. And we got to pray because I have no money. And I go, are you willing to go to jail? He goes, I'm willing to go to jail. I don't have the money. And this guy really, truly, every spare dime he had, he was given to the mission of working with these kids in the inner city. And so we're like, okay, man. So then we were like, well, we need to help come up with, the funds if this thing doesn't go. So he goes for his court date, waits through, finally calls his name, and he gets up there. And the judge says, how do you plead? And he says, guilty. And he said, okay, well, why are you here in my courtroom if you're here to plead guilty? He said, well, I am guilty of all the things that you see, Your Honor, but I'm actually here in your presence to throw myself onto the mercy of the court. And at that point, everybody in traffic court just starts to laugh out loud. Like, this guy is a joke. You got to be kidding me. He's saying he's guilty. So the judge says, wait, you're here because you know you're guilty? Absolutely. I was in the wrong, but I have no money. And so I'm here literally throwing myself onto the mercy of the court. So he's in the courtroom of judgment, but he's asking in the courtroom of judgment for mercy. The judge says, you know what? I love your heart. Not guilty. You don't have to pay a fine. And all of a sudden, the people in the courtroom who were going, ha ha, what just happened? And so he went and he had to sign some things, and now on his way out, the next guy goes, sir, I'm guilty, but I want to just say, and he goes, don't even think about it. Guilty. Pay the bill. Pay the bill. It was a moment where justice came together with mercy. That's an absolute picture that you and I need to understand when it comes to understanding who Jesus Christ is. If you have a coin, if you have a 5 rand coin, it has one inscription on one side, it has a different inscription on the other, but the whole thing has the same value, 5 rand. But the one inscription is true to the one side, the other inscription is true to the other side. And so when it comes to understanding, and we just sang about what I believe and who this Jesus is, you need to understand that this Jesus is both just and merciful. If you only think he's won, you're missing the other side of who he is. He is just, but he is merciful. And if you keep that into the forefront of your brain as we go through chapter 6 and 7 of where you're going to see both the justice and the mercy of God as he comes to absolutely introduce judgment to a world that has rejected him. But at the same time, he's offering mercy. You got to get this because it's absolutely essential for you to understand how you respond to this all-knowing, all-powerful, all-just, but all-merciful King and Savior. So, if you were to take a look and you were to do a study of human history, you would find that there's one dominant theme from the beginning until now and will continue through. And that is the dominant theme of human history is one of conflict. One of conflict. And the reason for that is at the root of that conflict is the human condition. And the human condition is corrupt and broken. We were not born whole. We were born broken. And out of that brokenness, we have corrupted thoughts, corrupted words, corrupted actions, of which you and I have perpetrated on other people, and we've also been on the receiving end of other people's corruption and brokenness. So the world is one of conflict in terms of history, and the condition of a human heart is one of corruption and brokenness. This is March 4th. There's a website. There's a website that you can go to if you want to see, what happened on this day in history, particularly if it's your birthday. And so I went to March 4th, and the overwhelming, dominant, repeated thing that happened on March 4th, beginning in 383 AD, where the Roman Emperor Julian takes 90,000 of his soldiers and they leave Antioch to go face the Scythian Empire. I didn't even know there was a Scythian Empire. And he and his soldiers encountered great loss of life, and even he himself lost his life. And you continue all the way through to the 2000s, and the dominating theme is one of conflict. Our human history is one long sequence of battles. And at the very core of the battle, because of human condition, is something spiritual, a spiritual battle. Now, I do need to let you know that there were some wonderful things and some strange things that happened on this day, March 4th. One being that the largest milkshake in the world was made, and guess where? In Nelspruit, South Africa. That this day in history, in Amarillo, Texas, in 1980-something, they first celebrated Mother-in-Law Day, which probably, for many of you, fits in the category of conflict. Anyway, we move on. So there's all these things, but that's the history. And when you get to chapter 6 and 7 of Revelation, Jesus is going to do a running commentary, and he's going to formulate a 7-point sermon by opening 7 seals on a scroll of truth. So here's the setting. The setting that we saw in chapter 4 and 5 was there was this John who has a vision, is ushered into this open door, and through this open door, he gets to see heavenly worship. It just would have been mind-blowing. And at the very center of heaven, he sees a throne. And everybody in heaven is centered on that throne. And then everyone gathered in heaven is kind of like in these circles, gathered around. So this there's this incredible gathered and centered worship around the one who sits on this throne, one who sits in unapproachable life. And in the midst of this, there's a voice that says, "Who is worthy to open the scroll?" Silence. Because there was no one in heaven. There was no one on earth. There was no one under the earth that was worthy to open the scroll of truth. And John begins to weep. John is the one who wrote and recorded this book. And then there's a hand. There's a hand of one of the elders. One of the 24 elders puts his hand on John and says, "Weep no more. Weep no more. Because there is one who is worthy to open this scroll of truth. He's the Lamb who was slain." And Jesus is handed the scroll, and he begins to, one by one, unseal these 7 seals. And in these 7 seals, there are 2 main truths that come through the opening of these seals. And you must get this. You must hear this. And you must keep at the forefront of your mind, he is a just God, but he is a merciful God. Jesus in the unsealing is saying to the world and to us now that I'm bringing judgment upon my enemies. I'm bringing judgment upon my enemies. So you go, well, who are Jesus's enemies? One word, wicked. The wicked. Now, you and I use this term wicked, and we know that it's more than just naughty. You know, if you use the word wicked, you're not going, "Oh, he was naughty." Now, there are high school students that use that term, and they actually, if something really good happens, and they go, "Wicked." So they'll use it in a positive term. "Wicked, dude." But it's more than wicked, dude, and it's way more than naughty. And most of us would go probably to the connotation that it is something you are extremely, extremely bad. But that's actually not the definition of wicked. You know what the definition of wicked is? In the Hebrew, in the Old Testament, when applied to an Israelite, it meant this. A wicked person was one who did not honor God and fear him, and did not embrace the covenant or the promise of grace in their hearts. That's what a wicked person is in the Bible. One who says, "You know what? I'm not honoring you. I'm not giving you the time of day. I'm living my own life. And I don't fear you because I don't really think that you have anything to do with me. And I certainly don't fear your judgment. And I'm not going to accept you with your gracious offer of eternal fellowship with you and intimacy, and I don't really care about your offer to rescue and save me in your mercy." That's a wicked person. So let me just tell you that Glenn Campbell lived the first 15 years of his life as a wicked person. What does that mean? I didn't give honor to God. I didn't fear him. And I didn't accept his covenant of grace in my heart. Therefore, I didn't have a relationship with him, and I didn't really care or even know about his offer of salvation. And I was raised in a church. And I was wicked. See, you and I don't even like to even put ourselves in that category. But some of you sitting here right now, you're there. I know what that's like. I remember it. And it wasn't just bad, because I was a relative. I was like a Boy Scout living next door. I was mischievous. I just rarely got caught. But I was wicked. What? Glenn, come on, that's too over the top. Yeah, I was. And at that point, I was under God's judgment because I hadn't received his mercy. Now, the other truth that comes through these seals is that Jesus, one is he's bringing judgment on his enemies, but the other one is he's bringing redemption to the community of faith. Who's the community of faith? The church. Those who do honor him, those who do fear him, those who have embraced his grace and said, oh God, without you, I cannot be in fellowship with you from now and all eternity. And without you, I can't receive your offer of merciful salvation. I can't get rescued. I need you. I need you. I need your forgiveness. I need to come under your mercy. Those are the two predominant truths that go through these seals. So follow along and read with me. Now I watched when the Lamb opened the 7 seals. That's a nickname for Jesus, the Lamb. You know why? Because he was sacrificed on your behalf and mine. He was like a lamb led to the slaughter. Why? So that you could receive mercy instead of judgment. Now, when I watched the Lamb opened one of the 7 seals, I heard one of the 4 living creatures say with a voice like thunder, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a white horse, and its rider had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he came out conquering and to conquer. When he opened the 2nd seal, I heard the 2nd living creature say, "Come." And out came another horse, bright red. Its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth so that people should slay one another. And he was given a great sword. When he opened the 3rd seal, I heard the 3rd living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a black horse. And its rider had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the 4 living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and wine." And when he opened the 4th seal, I heard a voice of the 4th living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a pale horse. And its rider's name was Death. And Hades, or hell, followed in his hoof prints. And they were given the authority over 1/4 of the earth to kill with the sword, with famine, and with pestilence, which is disease, and by wild beasts. So what you have in these first 4 seals that are opened by the Lamb is this quartet of horse and rider. And it's a commentary of the corruption of the earth. It's a commentary and a judgment of the evil that has taken place, the evil of war, the evil of famine, and the evil of disease, which has plagued human history from the beginning. Not the very beginning, but after Adam and Eve said, "You know what? We're not going your way. We're stepping outside of the boundaries of your love, and we're going to call our own shots because we actually want to be God." And we have that same spirit today. I want to call the shots. I want to be in charge. I love control. Yikes, it's still there. And Jesus is saying, because that corruption and brokenness is there, war, the conflict of war, the conflict of famine, and the conflict of disease has plagued human history. So let me give you a little bit of a defining to these horses and riders. The first one is this. The white horse symbolizes political and military leaders jockeying for power in a quest to expand their realms. You could see this throughout history. You could say Alexander the Great. You could say Genghis Khan. You can say all the Caesars and the emperors of Rome, Napoleon. The list goes on. And as a result, there brings to the people and to the nations a destabilization to the geopolitical situation and scene. And that's what's happening with the white horse. Destabilization. The red horse and rider represent the cruelty of blood-hungry, power-hungry persons. This rider is given a sword, and he's given permission to take peace from the earth. At this point, even though it's corrupt, even though that there's brokenness, even though these three evils are alive and well, and it's part of our daily context, God has always had his restraint of peace. But now all of a sudden, God takes his hand off, and it is violent anarchy. The result that violent destruction shakes the world socially. War is social evil, and it attacks the goodness of community. Do you know that the very first declaration of war took place in just the second generation of human history? Adam and Eve had two sons, Cain and Abel. And Cain, in a jealous, bitter fit of rage, declared war on who? An enemy, his brother. And he killed his brother in a field in broad daylight. And his blood screamed out to God. This is what corruption of the heart brings. A spirit of war between you and I, a spirit of war even within yourself, and a spirit of war with others around you. And Jesus is saying, I'm judging that. The next one is the black horse and rider, symbolized greed and the exploitation of all of God's resources, natural and mineral, and especially at times of war. And this rider is given two scales. The one scale is to measure the limited grain that is now available because of all of this war and all of this conflict. And the other scale actually measures the skyrocketing costs. You got limited grain and skyrocketing costs. You have an imbalance. And this is an exploitation of natural resources, and it shakes the world ecologically. Famine is ecological evil, and it attacks the goodness of God's bounty. The last one, disease or pestilence. The pale horse and rider, they symbolize a sweeping epidemic disease. The rider's name is Death, and wherever he rolls, a hellish death and plague follows with disease. Judgment on these three evils. This disease results, the evil of this disease is a shaking of the world biologically. And disease is a biological evil, and it attacks the goodness of God-given bodies like yours and mine. Now, I want to pause and I want you to look here, because now all of a sudden you're feeling the weight. Aren't you feeling the weight? You're like, preacher, get to something good, would you? I will. But here's the thing. You might feel the weight, but you know what? You're not shocked. You know why? Because you've grown up with war. You've grown up with famine. And you've grown up with disease. We just have become numb to it because we actually think that that is our reality. And God's going, no, I'm going to judge that context, but the real reality is my redemption. See, you and I are not even shocked anymore about images of war on the news or in movies. Man, I love going to, I'll throw myself in there. I love war movies. Or you play video games where you can literally mow down one after another, a whole squad, a whole platoon, or whatever. You can bomb villages. You can do all these things. And we become so desensitized to it. We literally have that corrupted spirit of war within us. And it's lived out in our relationships this way and this way. We're just numb to it. The corruption of famine. We're so used to it. We're so used to the corruption of famine that if I gave you facts and statistics about the fact of what starvation and malnutrition is in this country and around the world, you would sit there and you would probably go, that's terrible. But I wonder how deep it really actually goes into your reservoir of empathy. Or did it just really kind of break through the surface? If I told you, true fact, that 40,000 children last night starved to death, which happened when you and I probably went to bed well fed, does that even impact you? Does it register? And if so, how deeply? See, we're so used to this. We've grown tragically accustomed to war and famine. Go to the third one. Disease, sickness, and affliction of the body, of the mind, and of the emotional heart. It's so part of our context. My friends, this is just like we're so used to it. We rarely even get up in the morning and go, God, thank you for my health. Until some sickness or affliction hits you. And then all of a sudden, you get it. Or somebody that you love. And all of a sudden, sickness has become a real reality to you. You know, a year and a half ago, I had back surgery. And towards the end were 4 nerves, all four going through your spinal column were being pinched. I remember being out here on a Wednesday. I had come here to do a video preach. I barely stood up. And somebody came and said, how are you doing? You look like you're in real pain. I said, it gets my full attention. But when you're not sick, it doesn't. Do you see the corruption of our heart? And what we become numb to, thank be to God, Jesus doesn't ever get numb to it. And he said, that is not the story that I want to have human history be written about. And I am all about reversing it. And I'm bringing redemption. So let us turn the page and let's get to the good stuff of the redemption of war and of sickness and of famine. So here's what the King of the kingdom says. He said, the first time I've come and I've ushered in my kingdom. So the reality of my kingdom is not one of death, but one of resurrection. Jesus says, over each one of these evils, I am preaching resurrection. Every seal that he rips off, it's resurrection. This won't be the end story. This won't be the end story of these people who have trusted in my grace, who've received my mercy, and want to be with me for all. This won't be their story. Resurrection will be their story because I walked out of the grave and I defeated war, the conflict of famine, and I defeated the conflict of bodily sickness and affliction. Resurrection can be the last word in your life versus judgment. Get it. Get it. Because if you're sitting here and you're going, man, this is hard. Well, good, it's hard. I'm glad that you're hearing the tough news because that makes the good news all the more better. And if I was a doctor coming into the examining room and said, we just got your test results back. Dear Mr. Campbell, I don't like what I see. You got terminal cancer. And you got 6 weeks to live, maybe. Or, Mr. Campbell, we see you've got cancer. We're going to attack this thing. We're going to attack this thing. Jesus is going, you've got corruption and brokenness of heart. We're going to attack this thing. And when we attack it, it's a we. First, Jesus does all the work that we need to have done. He does all the work. And then if you step into his mercy and you receive his offer of grace and salvation and his fellowship with you from now, you now become transformed into an agent of redemption on this planet. So that means that you and I are bringing heaven to earth in these 3 diseases and in these 3, or it's not diseases, but in these 3 areas of conflict. That's what we're to be about. So Jesus says, let me tell you what resurrection says to war. Because conflict put him on a cross. Jealousy, bitterness, you name every sin on the planet, it put him on the cross. And when he came out of the grave, bodily raised from the dead, his resurrection spoke to a world of war and conflict and said, I'm offering peace. That's what my resurrection does. And if you accept who I am and what I've done, and you've come under my mercy, you now become peacemakers in a world of conflict. You're bringing heavenly peace into moments and situations, in relationships, in business, marketplace, family relationships. You're bringing peace, my peace, into these relationships. That's how we get transformed into redemptive agents. We're bringing something new that the world has gotten numb to. Famine. He brings resurrection and resolves the imbalance, the inequity of what is going on in our country or in the world, where the resources are just being exploited and only the few are receiving it. What happens is Jesus is saying, I'm the bread of life. I'm bringing resurrection. And now all of a sudden you're going to start living a more equitable life. You're going to redistribute my resources, my bounty. That's what my resurrection does. Do you know that South Africa leads the world in the greatest disparity of wealth? 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth. And 90% of the people live off the other 10. That's an imbalance. And people who've come under the mercy of God and received his redemption are now to be literally set free to start saying, where and how do I bring balance into my own checking account? And how do I start bringing equity into not worrying about what I want? Because that's really what we do. We worry way more about what we want than what we really actually need, so that I can help the needs of others. And it should begin not with the government, but it should begin with the church of God. We're worried about our next holiday. And there are moms down the street in Kaya Sands who are wondering, how am I going to feed my baby? Resurrection says, we're going to put this right, because heaven is not someplace we're going. Heaven is coming here, and it's coming through me. The third thing, disease. This conflict wastes and depletes and destroys the human body, and resurrection brings a restorative regeneration in mind, body, and soul. We got people every day. There's new disorders. There are new emotional things. There are new addictions. And it's like, no, we need to bring resurrection to this. Because when you bring Jesus' resurrection, he brings a wholeness back to a body that is wasting away. And we bring the power of prayer and healing to it. We come alongside those who are suffering, and we bring comfort. And when and if God beautifully moves, and I have seen time and time again him move and people being healed, but I've also seen other people being laid on prayers and not be healed. That doesn't mean that there isn't hope, because the hope of resurrection says you will either be healed in this life or in the next and forever. And there will be no pain. There will be no tears. There will be no suffering any longer. That's the resurrection I bring. Come under my mercy, not my judgment, because I am a conquering king. And a conquering king is saying to each one of you and me, come under my redemption, not my justice. Because both are in play. And he opens the seals. The fifth seal he opens. This seal deals with the persecution of believers who've stood up and said, I am standing up and I'm identifying myself as a believer. I'm identifying myself and associating myself with Jesus, and he's my Savior. I have come under his mercy. And there's this scene in heaven where people who were murdered and martyred because of their association with Jesus, they cry out to Jesus, how much longer? Oh, sovereign Lord, how much longer will we have to wait for you to avenge our blood? Jesus looks at him and he gives them a white robe. And they live in the beauty of his peace. And he says something very shocking. He said, when the last witness, when the last martyr on earth is slain for their identification with me, I will come and I will avenge your blood. So, note to self, stepping into the mercy of God is awesome. I would say you don't want to come under his judgment. You definitely want to come under his mercy. But when you come under his mercy, please know this. It doesn't mean that you're no longer exempt from suffering and pain. Particularly if you want to stand up and be accounted and associated and identified with Jesus. There are people every day who have the threat of a gun to their head or a knife to their throat in parts of this world just because they say, I'm a believer in Jesus Christ. And we wake up and we wonder, where will I spend my next holiday? The last seal, the sixth seal, and we'll get to the seventh in a week, is the sixth seal is open, and pardon the expression, literally all hell breaks loose. Not only with what we're talking about, these three evils, but now all of a sudden, the whole cosmos, the whole universe is being shaken. Stars are falling from heaven. Earthquakes are causing islands and mountains to disappear. And it's all getting destroyed in order for it to become new. You know why? Because things have to die in order for resurrection to happen. For Jesus to give you mercy, he had to die. For you and I to experience peace and wholeness and equity, Jesus had to die in order for resurrection to happen. So I want to ask you right now, what needs to die in you? What needs to die in you? What in your life right now needs to die so that Jesus can bring resurrection into your life? It's a gut check. It's a gut check, but it's a beautiful gut check. And Jesus opens this last seal, and the wicked cry out, "Who can stand in the presence of this conquering king?" It's a great question, because they couldn't. They were hiding, fearing, knowing that they were now experiencing the justice of God because they had denied and rejected the mercy of God. Who can stand before that king? It's a great question. And it gets answered at the beginning of chapter 7, verse 9. After this, I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and all peoples and language, standing. Who can stand? Standing before the throne and before the Lamb. And they were clothed in white, and they were waving palm branches in their hands, and they were crying with a loud voice, "Salvation belongs to our God." See, you want to be able to cry that out right now so that you can cry it out with great wonder and joy in heaven. Because the only people who will stand before this Lamb, this conquering King, are the angels who've done his bidding and the people who said, "I've honored this God, and I fear his judgment, but I have received his grace and his mercy and stepped into his saving work at the cross so that I now become an agent of redemption in this place and in this space at this time." That's awesome. And that, my friends, is an eye-opening truth that you and I oftentimes are absolutely either ignorant of or we've grown numb to. Don't. Because the resurrection power, the same power that raised Jesus from the dead, Ephesians says this, is alive and active in you right now. And we need to end conflict and become peacemakers. And we need to destroy the inequity in this country. And it's going to have to begin with us. But you're going to have to let something die in your own bank account or in your own hierarchy of needs for that imbalance to become equitable. And Jesus is saying, I'm judging these evils, but I'm going to redeem it all and make it all things new. Please stand. There were many people at the 8 o'clock who came up for prayer. And this is a sobering time. We usually end with a kind of a upbeat rip roar of a song. And that's okay. But sometimes there's a time for serious reflection and serious response. I want you to be like my friend Ed. If you're exploring the Christian faith, you need to be like Ed and acknowledge before a holy, holy, holy God, I'm guilty. But I'm throwing myself at the mercy of the Lamb so that my sin, past, present, and future, would be forgiven. And that I might step into this redemption that you are currently bringing and one day you will bring in its fullness. I want to be an agent in this country, at this time, and in this place. And I want to attack with mercy, war, famine, and disease. And for the rest of us, it's time for you. I say this in love. I'd say this to my own children. It's time to get your butt off the fence, the proverbial fence of religion, and get yourself firmly planted in the redemptive work that Jesus wants to do in you and through you. We got work to do. And there are people suffering all around. And we have the power of the good news and the power of resurrection to breathe into their lives. Will you stand up for Jesus and be associated with him in every sphere of your life? I'm not going to say amen. What I'm going to do is you can casually walk back, grab a coffee, talk with some people. You can go home, or you can come forward for prayer. But if you feel at some level God is doing something in your heart of conviction, don't pass on it. Jesus the King, the Lamb, is just and merciful. And he's saying to you in great love, come under my mercy. Let me conquer the evil. You come under my mercy. Father, I thank you for this time. I thank you for the truth that was unsealed for us today. It was apocalyptic. You uncovered truth of our human history and our human condition. Now, may we be men and women who follow in the footsteps of our Lion King, that we might bring redemption and resurrection to the evils in this world until you come back. And I'm not going to say amen. So there are going to be some people up front or around, and you're welcome to come, you're welcome to chat, or you're welcome to go. God bless.